I still have nightmares about what happened that summer. It was supposed to be our last adventure before college, one final trip before we all went our separate ways. Looking back, I don't know if we were brave or just plain stupid. Maybe a little of both. There were 6 of us, me, my girlfriend, and my best friend's couple we'd known since middle school. We'd been inseparable for years, and the idea of scattering across the country for college felt like the end of something sacred. We wanted to do something that would bind us together in memory long after we'd said goodbye. So, we decided on a 3-day camping trip deep in the woods, far from the noise of civilization. We packed our cars with tents, food, water, and enough alcohol and weed to turn the trip into a proper send-off. I'd been a Boy Scout for years, so I took charge of the practical stuff: firewood, first aid kits, flashlights, and a couple of hunting knives my dad insisted I bring. He'd said, though none of us thought we'd actually need them. The drive felt endless, winding through dirt roads swallowed by trees. And then finally, we found a clearing near a river, surrounded by forest so thick it swallowed the sunlight. Houses were supposedly a mile or so away, but with no cell service at the time, that isolation felt thrilling. Now, it haunts me. The first night was perfect. We set up 3 tents, one for each couple, close to the tree line. And we built a fire, cooked dinner with drinks. The next day, we split up to explore. My best friend and his girlfriend stayed behind at camp while the rest of us followed a narrow trail into the woods. The path twisted through ancient trees, their branches clawing at the sky. After 20 minutes, we stumbled on something none of us expected: a rusted metal fence. Beyond it lay a cemetery. It wasn't some crumbling horror movie graveyard. The plots were old but tidy, with fresh flowers and handwritten notes propped against headstones. Still, the place felt wrong. We stood in silence, reading names of people long dead, wondering who still cared enough to visit. Then someone noticed tire tracks on the far side of the cemetery, leading to a makeshift parking lot. People came here regularly, but for what? We didn't stick around to find out. We followed the trail a little farther and turned back as the sun began to sink. That night, we wanted to go all out. And we did. We drank until the fire blurred into streaks of orange, smoked until the stars pulsed overhead. We laughed louder, clung to each other for a while. It felt like we were untouchable. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the screaming started. It wasn't the playful shrieks from earlier, this was pure terror. I jolted upright, heart slamming against my ribs, and fumbled for my flashlight. I unzipped the tent just in time to see a dark figure slashing through the other couple's shelter with something long and glinting. The guy inside burst out, swinging his flashlight like a bat, connecting with a sickening crack. The attacker staggered back, and in the swaying beam of light, I saw him clearly, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed head to toe in black, clutching a machete. "Run!" the guy shouted, dragging his girlfriend toward their car. They were closest to it, and in the chaos, the rest of us realized we'd have to sprint toward the man to reach the vehicle. Panic locked my legs until my girlfriend yanked my arm. "The cemetery," the guy yelled as they peeled out of the clearing. The trail beyond the graveyard, the one with the tire tracks. It was our only shot. "Go." I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and bolted into the trees. My best friend and his girlfriend pounded behind us, their breaths ragged. The woods swallowed us, but I could still hear him boots crunching leaves. He was close. Too close. And the only thing I have was the pocket knife for safety. Then he stepped into the moonlight, and I saw his face. He wasn't wearing a mask. His features were ordinary mid-30s, stubbled jaw, eyes flat and dead as the graves around us. He was holding the machete. "Come out," he said. "I just want to talk." No one moved. No one breathed. He laughed, a dry, hollow sound, and swung the machete lazily. He moved toward my best friend's girlfriend first. She whimpered, and his head snapped in her direction. I lunged before I could think. The knife sank into the back of his knee. He howled, buckling as the machete clattered to the ground. I scrambled back, yanking my girlfriend up as headlights speared through the trees. The car, our friends, had come back. "Run!" I screamed. We sprinted toward the lights, the man's curses chasing us. The car door flew open, and we piled in, limbs tangling, sobs and shouts filling the space. Tires spun in the dirt as we fishtailed onto the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw him limping toward the tree line. We didn't stop driving until we saw a porch light a tiny cabin in the darkness. An elderly couple answered our knocking, their faces shifting from alarm to pity as they took in our dirt-streaked panic. They wrapped us in blankets, fed us soup, and called the police. The cops arrived hours later, skeptical until they saw our shredded tents. They combed the woods, but found nothing, no machete, no man. We didn't feel lucky. The next morning, the old man lent us his rifle while we gathered our belongings. The campsite was destroyed, tents slashed, coolers overturned, beer bottles shattered, but nothing was stolen. It wasn't about theft. He'd wanted to hurt us, to play with us. After that, we never go camping anymore. My girlfriend jokes that I've become a city person, but she doesn't push it. She still jumps at sudden noises too. The worst part isn't the fear, it's the guilt. I keep wondering if I'd been faster, smarter, braver. Could I have stopped him sooner? Could I have protected everyone better? The knife was a fluke, a desperate gamble. It was luck, not our skills, that saved us. That was the last weekend of summer, the kind of trip we'd done before. Every August, my friends and I would pack up our gear and drive deep into the mountains of North Carolina, far from the college grind and part-time jobs. That camping had always been our tradition trip. That year of 2013, we didn't know it'd be our final trip. We'd chosen a remote spot near a reservoir in Pisgah National Forest, a place we'd camped since high school. The dirt roads leading there were rutted and narrow. We set up our tents on a ridge overlooking the water, with one campsite nestled below us and another farther up the slope. The lake had shrunk that year, drought leaving cracked mudflats along its edges. We didn't care. To us, it was perfect. The first night was all laughter and nostalgia. We built a fire and reminisced about past trips, the time we'd gotten lost hiking. The summer had rained for 3 days straight. The woods felt safe, familiar. We'd never once worried about anything worse than mosquitoes or a stray raccoon. A trouble started on the second day. A new group arrived at the campsite below us. Their pickup trucks roared into the clearing around noon, music blaring even before they'd unloaded their coolers. At first, we shrugged it off. College kids, we figured, blowing off steam. But as the sun dipped behind the mountains, their energy turned jagged. Their shouts weren't the loose, happy kind. They were sharp, aggressive. Bottles shattered against rocks. By midnight, their stereo was cranked so loud the bass vibrated through the ground. Oh my God, that was so annoying. My best friend since middle school, the guy who'd taught me how to cast a fishing line and shotgun a beer, volunteered to go talk to them. "Be polite," I warned as he grabbed a flashlight. He just grinned. Since when am I not polite? 10 minutes later, he stumbled back, blood smeared across his face. Blood was dripping from his nose. "They're cracked out," he panted. "I just tried to say please and the guy just swung." A cold knot formed in my gut. The campsite below had gone quiet, their music suddenly cut off. We debated packing up, but it felt like overreacting. This was our spot, our tradition. We'd dealt with rowdy campers before. We were wrong. I fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion, only to jolt awake hours later to screams. Real screams, the kind that strip your lungs raw. I scrambled out of my tent. 2 of our friends, a couple who'd wandered off earlier to visit another site, were staggering into camp. Blood glistened on their faces and hands. Behind them, two hulking figures advanced. One held a broken bottle, glass teeth gleaming. The other gripped a hunting knife long enough to gut a deer. They thought I was him. The guy shouted, pointing at my bloodied friend. The attackers had mistaken him for the one who'd confronted them. No words, no warning, just a bottle smashed over his skull. Then a blade swung at his girlfriend when she tried to shield him. Chaos erupted. My best friend stepped forward, hands raised. "We don't want trouble," he pleaded. The man with the knife didn't hesitate. He lunged, driving the blade into my friend's chest. Time fractured. Someone tackled the attacker. Someone else screamed, "They're killing us." The second man slashed wildly, catching another friend across the stomach. He dropped, clutching himself, blood seeping through his fingers. The rest of us became animals, dragging the wounded back, hurling logs from the fire pit, screaming for help that wouldn't come. No cell service. No rangers. Just the woods, swallowing our cries. Somehow, we got the bleeding ones into cars. One vehicle fishtailed down the dirt road, aiming for the highway to meet an ambulance. The rest of us stayed, pressing towels into wounds, whispering shaky lies. "You're okay, you're okay." The attackers vanished. For a heart-stopping hour, we thought they'd circle back. But then sirens wailed in the distance. Sheriff's deputies found their Jeep Cherokee later, stuck in the dried-up lake bed, tires spinning in mud. The men were high on meth, the cop said. They'd come prepared to hurt someone. Anyone. The aftermath was worse than the attack. My best friend survived. The knife had missed his heart by an inch. The guy slashed across the stomach needed 2 surgeries. The couple would carry facial scars for years. They were caught and sentenced to 7 years in prison. We never camped again. I left Carolina and moved to a city after college, someplace where the nights are loud and the woods are just a smudge on the horizon. My life had become a choked knot of deadlines, breakups, and panic attacks that left me gasping in bathroom stalls. I needed to disappear. My best friend, sensing I was one bad day from unraveling, offered me the keys to his family's hunting cabin. "It's 45 miles from the nearest road," he said. "No internet, no neighbors. Just trees and quiet." It sounded like salvation. I set out on my journey by car, keeping the map my friend had given me by my side. After traveling for a few hours, I finally reached my destination. The cabin sat in a hollow, surrounded by pines, thick trees. It was exactly as he'd described. One room with a wood stove, a moth-eaten couch, and windows clouded by decades of dust. I spent the first day chopping wood, trying to outrun the static in my head. By dusk, the air turned crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and resin. I built a fire pit outside. Then just after that, maybe 15 minutes later, I heard a laugh. High and jagged. But when I looked up, I saw her. She stood at the edge of the tree line. Her dress was a tattered sack, her hair a nest of knots. Even from 30 yards, I could see her grin too wide, too many teeth. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, her head cocked like a bird studying prey. "Hello, who's there?" I called. The laugh came again, shrill and looping. She took a step forward, bare feet crunching leaves. I stood, fists clenched, but she stopped. For a long moment, we watched each other. Then she melted into the trees, her laughter lingering like a swarm of gnats. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, morning brought brittle sunlight and the illusion of safety. I tried to write it off, a local vagrant, harmless and lost. I spent the day hiking, trying to shake the dread pooling in my gut. By afternoon, storm clouds bruised the sky. I hurried back to the cabin, gathering firewood. Night fell hard, and by the time I built a fire, when I heard her voice again, "You're lonely," she sang. She stood closer this time, 10 paces from the firelight. Her dress was replaced by a man's flannel shirt, crusted with mud. Her feet were bloody. "Go away," I said, voice trembling. "I'll call the police." She giggled, a sound like splintering ice. "No service here, city boy. No one coming." Her accent was thick Appalachian syrup. But I came. Felt you calling. "We're the same, you and me." "We're not." I edged toward the cabin door. "Ain't we?" She took a step, her grin stretching. "You're hollow inside. I can smell it." I slammed the door, locking it with a rusted deadbolt. Outside, she hummed a nursery rhyme tune, warped and sour. The next night, the storm hit at midnight. Rain lashed the roof as I lay on the couch, a kitchen knife clutched to my chest. The cabin groaned under the wind's fists. Then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was branches, but the rhythm was wrong. Scritch, scritch, like claws on glass. She stood at the window, her face pressed to the pane. Rain slicked her hair into black ropes. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. "Let me in," she crooned, voice syrupy. "I'll make the quiet stop." I froze, praying she'd think the cabin empty. Her fingernails dragged down the glass. "I see you hiding, hungry thing. Let me feed you." The door rattled. Not the wind, her. Shoulder slamming wood, again and again. Laughing as the deadbolt shrieked in its brackets. I barricaded it with the couch, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip. She howled, a feral sound that raised the hair on my neck. "You'll let me in." Spittle hit the window. "You will. You will." For hours, she circled, sang, scraped, begged. I pressed myself into a corner, knife aimed at the shadows until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the windows. She was gone. I left at first light, driving without stopping until I was safely back in town. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was a drifter, mentally ill, someone who had wandered too far into the woods. Then, a few days later, I got the message. "I found you again." I blocked her immediately. I was shocked at how she knew my number. I had changed it, yet sometimes I still felt afraid of her, her voice and her behavior. And you know, memories fade with time. The same happened to me. I never went back there after that.